Not long ago, Senator Al Franken, a former Saturday Night Live comedian, was forced to resign from office due to a Me Too scandal for the unwanted groping of young women. How did this guy ever become a senator? Well, here's how it happened. On election night 2008, many people thought that Norm Coleman had won, the sitting senator. It was a narrow margin, but they thought it was a definitive election. 8 months later, multiple recounts, lawsuits, highly challenged ballots, including some that were proven illegal, and claims that some were hidden in the trunk of a car, Al Franken was declared the victor with a 312 vote margin out of 3 million cast. This gave the Democrats their 60th vote in the U.S. Senate, a filibuster-proof majority. It was later proven that over 1,000 ballots were felons illegally voting. Last episode, we exposed the dirty tricks used in elections, what they are and how to combat them. We also explained just how controlling elections really is economic warfare. Now we're going to talk about outright electoral theft. Join me in the Economic War Room for our second episode in this series. There's a famous quote that many people attribute to Ben Franklin. When the people find they can vote themselves money out of the Treasury, it will herald the end of the Republic. That's bad. That would be bad where people could end our Republic because they got greedy or because they were ignorant. What's worse is when someone can steal an election and literally steal your money that way. When the votes were counted in Minnesota and the ballot shifted from Coleman to Franken, the Democrats got a 60-vote majority in the Senate. If that hadn't happened, the Republicans might have been willing to filibuster Obamacare and tax hikes. Your money was directly affected by that potential election fraud in Minnesota. Al Franken's election, though, wasn't the first Senate election that was suspicious, and it's certainly not the last. For those of you in Texas, I want to tell you that in 1948, the future president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ, he won based on outright fraud. I want to read to you from the Washington Times in 2013. Lyndon Johnson, the 36th president, got to the U.S. Senate in 1948 by winning the closest race in Texas history by a margin of 87 votes out of more than 1 million cast. An election judge in tiny Alice, Texas, said he counted more than 200 names on the voting roll for Box 13 that were written in alphabetic succession in the same hand, the same color of ink. When a federal court subpoenaed Box 13, it was discovered to be lost. LBJ took his seat in the Senate and went on to become president. Even the New York Times admitted that Johnson's election had been rigged. They did a story in 1990 where they quoted Pulitzer Prize winner Robert Caro, who wrote a book on Johnson's cheating titled Means of Ascent. This guy won Best Nonfiction Book of the Year for this book, and he says his campaign people through the years have offered deathbed confessions. The election was rigged. Mysterious ballots appeared, unexplained surge in voters, and dead people apparently rising from the grave to vote for the Democrats. There's no question that Johnson cheated to win his Senate seat. Today, though, cheating can get much more sophisticated. For example, the voting machines, you go into the booth, you tally your ballot, those can be hacked. It's the new high-tech way to cheat. There's an article that was published in CNET.com that says DEF CON hackers find it's very easy to break voting machines. Voting is at the foundation of every democracy, but hackers find it's on shaky ground thanks to shoddy technology. So we brought in our own white hat hacker. You know, a good guy. He works for the government. We had to obscure his face and his voice so he'd be willing to come on camera and tell us about it. But I want you to meet Jekyll. Welcome, Jekyll. Can I call you Jekyll?
Yes, that is the name that I go by.
Okay. So we've had a lot of information that says that voting machines can be hacked. Is that really true?
It's so true that 11-year-old kids can be able to do it. It was such a ridiculous idea that grown adults within the hacker community didn't even want to be part of it because it's been a running joke for over a decade.
What do you mean by that? Tell me what 11-year-old kids can do.
During the 2018 Black Hat Convention in Las Vegas, they had an area called Voter Village. In that area, when they decided they were going to show how easy it was to hack the elections, everyone laughed about it so much that if an adult does it, you'll just get laughed out of the room. So let's make a mockery of it and bring kids in and show how easy it was to hack these systems. So they brought in a bunch of 10, 11, 12-year-old kids, some younger than that, and let them have a go at these systems. At one point, an 11-year-old kid hacked an election machine in less than 30 seconds.
30 seconds? What does that mean? So somebody walks into the voting booth and they, in 30 seconds, half a minute, they can change the votes that are on the machine?
You don't even have to walk in to be able to hack the machine. You can sit out in your car in the parking lot and do it.
Wow. So what integrity is there in our election system?
When it comes to the electronic devices, absolutely none. Whether it's at the server level or the machine you walk up to and touch, they can all be compromised. If you are using a password to gain access to it, those passwords can be compromised in seconds.
Why don't we catch it?
Because the people who are running the systems up, they don't worry about it because they all have to be a part of it. And when you have systems that have not been updated in over a decade, one electronic voting machine was running Windows Server 2000 and had not been updated in over 10 years. When it's that type of flagrant laziness, it's asked to be done on purpose.
What can we do about it?
Well, the main source for being able to correct these systems is ensuring these companies follow up with what is called the NIST standards. And each one of those systems should be held by government standards to check and ensure they're certified that they're within U.S. government standards that your average soldier has to have. Those type of standard compliances on systems they use on a daily basis, but we can't even have on our election machines.
Wow. Well, Jekyll, we sure appreciate you taking time to explain this. It's frightening. Thank you very much.
Glad to be here.
Jekyll showed us that it's possible to hack voting machines. That can have a real-life impact. My good friend Sharon Angle ran for the Senate in 2010 against the Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. All the polls showed that she was up at least by 3%. In fact, Real Clear Politics average had her up about 3%. The exit polls showed her winning by a substantial margin. And yet when all the ballots were counted, Harry Reid pulled out almost a 6-point win. Now, that was 2010. That was a Tea Party wave. Sharon is a Tea Party darling. I briefed her before the election on economic warfare issues, and she was ready to go to the Senate and stand up for you and help protect you against economic warfare. Well, the bad guys took her out. We invited Sharon into the economic war room to tell us a little about her election story. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you, Kevin. It's great to be on your show.
Well, it's great having you. Hey, could you tell us a little bit about your election when you, by all polls and by all accounts, had beaten the Senate Majority Leader, only to find out when the polling was all counted that apparently you lost? Tell us that story.
Okay, well, I'm gonna plug my book unashamedly here. It's called Right Angle, and on page 122, I answer that question: did Harry Reid steal the election? And of course he did. The answer is yes. We've documented the part that we know about that we could document. We took it actually to the Attorney General at the federal level and also at the state level and asked them to prosecute for voter coercion, but they were unable to do that in 2010. They said we didn't have enough standing. And even though I had a great attorney, Cleta Mitchell, it just went nowhere. So that's usually what people want to know. Why didn't you prosecute for this? And we tried.
You were up by
Yeah.
something like 3 points, of what I saw in the Real Clear Politics. But
That was Real Clear Politics. Some had me up by as much as 5. Others had me up by as much as 8. So it kind of depended on the exit poller. But there was no exit polling that said he was beating me. Everybody said, no, this one she's got. And at 10 after 7 on election night, Tuesday night, I was met at the airplane there in Las Vegas, and they said, you've lost the election. This is 10 minutes after the polls close. I called an exit poller at that point, and I said, what happened? And he said, you know, Sharon, I can count everything but cheating. And then we started getting the reports into our office after that on what the cheating was. We had 4 illegal aliens that came in from Pahrump and said we felt like we had to vote for Harry Reid. They handed us a list, and we went in and we voted even though we are not legal to vote.
Right, but that's just, I mean, 4 voters, that's kind of a hard way to swing election. I think your election was swung maybe 10 points from what the results were given and what actually happened.
We figure it was 9.3%, and the way that we figured that was because every election down the ballot swung by 9.3% from the exit poll to the actual vote count, and that was every race, not just mine, but the congressional race, right down through a judgeship in Clark County. We know that they came across the line from California, Utah, and Arizona to vote in Nevada, and we know that they were bussed in. We know that there was an outage, a power outage in the most Republican area of Las Vegas, Henderson, right at the time that most people would be voting. And that power outage lasted for over an hour. We feel like those machines were reset.
Yeah, to swing an election 10 points, you can't do it just by bussing people. You actually have to manipulate machines, manipulate counting, or do something. So when you got all of this data and evidence, and I know you produced a documentary on it, and it's something every voter should see, what did you do to challenge besides go to the Attorney General? Did you challenge the election officially?
We tried to challenge. That was our challenge. We took the election to the Attorney General and the Secretary of State here in Nevada and said, we feel like this should be a null and void election. We should have a new election because of the things that we found. And they would not even give us a court time. There was no judge. There was nothing. They said, "You don't have standing. We're not going to deal with this case."
They just railroaded. They said,
Yes.
We're not looking at this.
Right. Well, you know, both of those people were Democrats in our state. They were Democrats elected in our state, and also at the federal level. Remember, Eric Holder was the Department of Justice person, and he wouldn't hear the case either. Cleta took it everywhere she could to get the case heard so that we could challenge the election, and they just refused to give us standing. So in 2016, then, when our House changed over, we got all new representatives, and I took it again. Actually, it was 2014, I guess, when we changed over. Anyway, 4 years ago, I took that case once more to now a Republican Attorney General and a Republican Secretary of State, and asked them to pursue it for me, because as we all know, justice delayed is justice denied. And I said that we need to pursue this. I made a tour in 2012, and on that tour, I just asked people if they thought that their elections were fair and honest, and many of them had absolute proof that it wasn't, that there was tampering with machinery, there was tampering with the votes themselves, with mail-in ballots, with we're now coming into a phase here of ballot harvesting, if you will. I never heard that term until this last election, but it's really getting to be
it's a problem.
Blood sport, I guess, here
Well, Sharon,
in
what
America.
we're going to do is I'm going to ask you to send me to put into our battle plan some remedies, some suggestions. First will be to get your video and then other suggestions you have. But I really appreciate you taking time with us in the economic war room. I think your election and the results that happened was probably the most blatant example of fraud in the last 50 years. So I really appreciate you sharing with us. And we're going to get the answers, and we're going to look at those and provide them to you. What can we do? This is a problem, but the next question is, what do we do about it? In Sharon Engel's election, there may have been hacking of the voting machines. There may have been nefarious activities in the counting room. There may have been a lot of things, but one of the things that definitely happened is there were illegal votes. According to Dallas News, America has 3.5 million more voters than we have eligible adult citizens. That's crazy. How can we have more voters than eligible voters? Well, those would be illegal voters. We've seen evidence of illegal voting all over the place, and including in Broward County. There were 600 voters in Broward County in the midterm elections that were age 104 or older. Are you telling me there's 600 people got up and went to the polls that are age 100 plus? I didn't even know there were 600 people in Broward County age 100 plus. We did an analysis of this with our friends at ASOG. They looked at the midterm elections, and we brought Adam Kraft back into the war room. You remember Adam Kraft. Major Adam Kraft. He served with distinction. He's a West Point grad. He was a part of the Defense Intelligence Agency. He came back and he shared with us some of the things that they were finding in the 2018 midterms. Adam, I know ASOG was hired and brought in to look at the results of the 2018 midterm election. Can you tell us a little bit about what you found?
There's a lot of smoke and there's some fire. We have a huge problem in this country. We know that at least 37 states have an issue with the elections. At the machine level, at the central server level, the companies that deal with the election, in the Department of Defense and in Congress, you have to disclose ownership of defense contracting stock. Why don't we do that with these companies that deal with our elections?
That own the election machines that manufacture and sell them to the communities.
Right. Anything that has to do with voting. Why don't we do that? When I had to fill out my OAG 450, my final promotion inside the intelligence community, I had to disclose things like that. Why don't we do that? It gets to the DNA of what these companies really are about.
Well, we know. We talked to a hacker who said absolutely 11-year-old can hack a voting machine. So we know they're vulnerable. We don't see anyone fixing them. What does the intelligence community say when they look at the voting in the United States? Anything? Are they looking at it?
Well, look at what they're seeing outside. We have one country that I guess you could say U.S. persons were consulting with. They took all their voting machines out. They went back to paper ballots. I can't name the country. You can figure out who did that, but there's a definite problem.
Did it work? Did it clean up things?
Well, they're on the way to do that, but they realize they have a lot more work to do because there are other issues that come with paper ballots. But at least you get rid of the electronic specter of all the crazy things that happen, especially at the central count.
I hear rumors that George Soros owns the voting machine companies.
Again, you have to look at the DNA of these companies. Everyone should know who's in it. We know who is part of Raytheon, who's part of L3, and who's part of Lockheed Martin, all the great defense companies that keep us safe, because we don't want profiteering. I know there's still an issue, and people go back to that, especially when the campaigns roll around, who's got stock in what. Why don't we make the same issue with these companies?
Are these companies big household names? Or are they
No, they're not. They're not. In fact, when we were first re-looking at the issue, doing the midterms, we had to educate ourselves on it. And we're the people to go to on this.
And if you didn't know it, the
Exactly.
average person has no idea who's making the machine that's counting their vote, determining who they voted for, and so forth. This is a serious problem.
Right, a level of obfuscation, you've got to gauge that. Then you have to ask yourself, why are they doing that? Then you have to say, what level of foreign involvement is there? What can we find out? Who's working on these machines? Who are the contractors? Are there dual citizens? Which there shouldn't be any dual citizens. These these are some of the things that we discovered that really bothered us, and it bothered the folks we had to report back to.
Well, my personal hope is that you just keep digging and that you uncover the truth. I know you're great at what you do, and I really appreciate you doing that effort. It's great for the American people.
Thank you. There are no coincidences. We have a huge problem. The country has a huge problem. So that means the world has a huge problem.
Wow. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you.
One of the great despots of his time was Joseph Stalin in the Soviet Union. Stalin may have killed 20 million people at least, and maybe some estimates are as high as 40 million people. You know what Stalin said about elections? He said, "I consider it completely unimportant who in the party will vote or how. But what is extraordinarily important is this: who will count the votes and how. Even if we get all the dirty tricks gone, even if we make certain that the voting machines are proper, if there's nefarious activity when the votes are counted, it will change the election." This is a serious problem that we're looking at in depth in the Economic War Room. It's something that we will report on with you more later. But he who counts the votes determines he who wins the elections. Now, I've got some good news. We talk about the bad, now we're going to talk about some of the good news. Did you know that Los Angeles County just recently agreed to purge its voting rolls of illegal citizens? They're going to take 1.5 million inactive voters off the lists. Why did this happen? Well, a grassroots organization called the Election Integrity Project, California. A lot of those people volunteered their time and worked tireless hours so that they could find who was not properly on the rolls and who needed to be removed. And then Judicial Watch sued the city of Los Angeles and the county to force them to remove these. Judicial Watch won the lawsuit, and 1.5 million illegal voters are going to be yanked from the rolls. That's good news. You can do good things too. Well, we're encouraged by what happened in Los Angeles, but what you need to do is you need to be a part of the grassroots efforts that ensure safe and free and fair elections. We need to, number one, we need to demand that we return to paper ballots. And I don't mean any paper ballots. They need to be numbered paper ballots so that we can actually have a paper trail in an audit. What's going on with these voting machines, there's no trail that we can actually look at. Do you remember the hanging chads in the Bush v. Gore election? At least somebody could look at paper evidence and say who voted where and why. We need to return to those. We need to return to poll watchers. We need to return to where people will go and sit at the polls and make sure not only that people are voting fairly, but when the votes are being counted, they're being watched also. And we need to clean the rolls. This is going to take a grassroots effort and lawfare. You need to do what they did in Los Angeles with Judicial Watch, and we got to get the rolls cleaned up. You need to get involved. The only way to win elections going forward will be to win by large margins and make sure the cheating is minimized. So we put together a complete battle plan, and you can download it at economicwarroom.com. It'll show you what the problems are, it'll recap them, and it will explain to you what role you can play in guaranteeing free and fair elections going forward. And finally, we need to pray. We need to pray for our leaders, and we need to pray over the elections. Now here's the beautiful. We've had the bad, the fraud. The good is what we can do about it. The beautiful is the image of the purple finger in Iraq. Voting is a sacred right. It's an honor. I was filled, and you probably were also, with pride and joy when we witnessed Iraqi citizens emerging from the polling place in 2005 with their ink-stained finger proving that they voted for the first time in decades. Even CNN admitted this was a good day for Iraq. Or maybe you beamed with pride on September 20th, 1990, which also was a day of celebration. The Berlin Wall had fallen. Germany was about to be reunited, but they didn't just force it to happen. They actually had a free and fair election, the first one for East Germans in decades, and they were allowed to go to the polls and vote if they wanted to reunite Germany, ending the Cold War. Prior to that, in East Germany, all the elections had been rigged. There was no freedom, but they voted with their West German counterparts, and the nation was reunited. Fair elections and freedom go hand in hand. It's our duty to protect the integrity of our elections. If we do so, we can pass freedom to the next generation. If we don't, As President Reagan warned, we may well spend our sunset years telling our children and our grandchildren what it once was like to live in America where men were free. Remember, what we see as a marketplace, our enemies view as a battle space. This is Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room.